The Creator was one of my most anticipated movies of the year, but now that I've seen it, did it live up to my expectations? Well, let's get into it. What's up, my dude? Your friendly neighborhood Tony here, and as I do with all my reviews, I'm going to give you a little bit of information about The Creator, who made it, what it's about, all that good stuff. Then I'll go into the things I did and did not like about it, pros and cons. And finally, I'll let you know who I think this movie is for, if anyone. If that kind of thing sounds good to you and you want to keep up to speed on all the new big movies that are coming out in theaters and at home, make sure you subscribe. The Creator takes place against the backdrop of a war between humans and artificially intelligent robots called simulants. There, a former soldier is recruited to hunt down and kill the creator of a mysterious weapon with the power to end the war, and mankind itself. The Creator was written by Chris Weitz and Gareth Edwards, who would also direct. Gareth Edwards is, of course, probably most known for directing Rogue One, a Star Wars story, which is one of my favorite post-original trilogy Star Wars movies. And I am a lifelong Star Wars fan who has seen every single movie and show multiple times. He also directed the 2014 Godzilla movie, which I really dug as well, although the reviews weren't phenomenal. The Creator stars John David Washington, who is probably most known for being the lead in the Christopher Nolan movie Tenet, or possibly most known for being Denzel Washington's son, which, I'll be honest, I didn't actually know until pretty recently. You also have Gemma playing his love interest, Allison Janney going a bit against type and playing this gruff, basically evil colonel. Ken Watanabe plays pretty much his character from The Last Samurai, except this time he's a robot. And finally, the young actor Madelein Voyles plays Alfie, a young robot sidekick to Washington's character. I also want to make sure I mention the composer for The Creator, which is the legendary Hans Zimmer, and the cinematographers, who are Greg Fraser and Oren Soffer. Fraser was most recently the cinematographer on Dune and The Batman, as well as on Rogue One, so he is super legit. And since we're talking about cinematography, let's go ahead and get started with some of my pros. First up, the visuals for The Creator are absolutely stunning. You can really see the connection between it and Rogue One, whether it's in the opening few minutes where there's this whole battle on the beach that feels right out of the ending of Rogue One, or just the way they show different locations. Honestly, every single location looks so beautiful and genuinely interesting. There are no boring sets or locations, and you really feel like they must have spent a ton of money on production, which is wild because they didn't. The production budget was around $80 million, which, yes, sounds like a lot of money, but it's less than half of what a lot of other major sci-fi or comic book movies spend nowadays. And this looks so much better than most of the recent $200+ million comic book movies I've seen. It's genuinely shocking, but that's what happens when you invest in talent and don't just throw money at a problem with no real vision. Marvel. Aside from just how pretty the movie is, and it is very pretty, there's a lot of creativity in some of the direction and some of the writing. And at the same time, it nods to a lot of sci-fi movies and books and even video games. If you've played Fallout in particular, there's a really clever intro sequence that feels super reminiscent of that game. I won't spoil it, but I definitely got a kick out of that. Really, the whole intro leading all the way up through the battle on the beach is basically flawless and hooks you right in. The music is also phenomenal, and between that and the cinematography, I was really feeling the vibes of this movie, if that makes any sense at all. The vibes were good. The actual story itself is pretty simple, which can be both good and bad, but the good part is that it's easy to follow. It wears all its inspirations on its sleeves, so you know pretty early on who the good guys are and who the bad guys are and what the general plot of the movie is going to be. It's not one of those movies that's going to have you super confused by the ending. There's a ton of connections between this movie and the real life war in Vietnam or the fire bombings of Japan during World War II, if you're familiar with American history at all. Now, that's something you may or may not appreciate depending on your preference, but I tend to like it when sci-fi or even fantasy movies are able to draw parallels to our reality. And this definitely does that pretty clearly. It's hard to ignore. Another pro I'll touch on is John David Washington and his performance. I thought he did a great job here. He's very charming and likable in the beginning of the movie and does a really great job expressing very deep emotion as things start to ramp up towards the climax. I also felt at times that a lot of his lines were just ad-libbed, and I feel like that's probably just due to how natural he is in this role. I don't know if everybody's gonna like his style, but I definitely did. Thankfully, Madelein, who plays the child robot sidekick to Washington, is also very good in her role, which is super important and can really impact how emotionally compelling the movie is as a whole. Lastly, I'll say the movie isn't all super serious and depressing. There are some genuinely funny moments, one in particular that reminded me of some of the battle droids from Star Wars. You'll know it when you see it for sure, but that does bring me to some of the things I didn't like so much about the creator. So let's go ahead and get into those. But before we do, I want to let you know that this review is sponsored by you. That's right, I'm just a tiny little channel here without any big corporate sponsors or anything like that. So just by watching the video, you're really helping me out. If you want to be super dope and show your support in the easiest possible way, do me a favor and just scroll down and click the little like button below the video. And maybe leave a comment. Let me know your favorite sci-fi movie of all time. I'll tell you mine at the end of the video. You can also now join as a channel member if you want to help support me financially, or just subscribe for free if you want to keep up to speed on all the new big movies that are coming out. So if you do, either way, I appreciate it. All right. On to the cons. Okay, so I touched on the humor, and although there are a couple genuinely cute or funny moments in the movie, there are also some cringy ones. And it almost feels like they got a note to go back in and lighten up some of the scenes, and it just doesn't always go well. Aside from that, we talked about how the movie is very clearly inspired by a lot of other sci-fi movies and books and video games, and at times it can feel less inspired by and more like a generic copy. And I hate to say that. Sci-fi is probably my favorite genre of movies and just stories in general. So I love having movies like this come out, but you can't just slap together a generic plot and throw in a bunch of references to some greater properties and expect that to be enough. Then you have to take into account how subpar some of the writing was, whether it's the painfully obvious black and white expressions of how bad the humans are and how sweet and innocent and pure the robots are, or the blatant exposition explaining things in the clunkiest way possible when they should have been able to just guide us towards that information through the natural progression of the story, or some of the revelations that happen towards the end of the movie that are meant to be mind-blowing, but anyone that has seen a movie or read a book in their life would have seen those things coming a mile away. Look, here's the thing. I was super hyped for the creator. I am a big fan of Gareth Edwards' work. I am a sci-fi obsessive, and I love movies that are beautifully shot and scored like this one. But I can't ignore the fundamental problems I have with the writing. Now, don't get me wrong, I don't think The Creator is a bad movie, and the themes of slavery and the atrocities of war and desperation for survival and desire for peace are all great. Oh, and I should say this movie was shot on a Sony Fx3, which, if you're a tech nut like me, is amazing. It's a consumer camera that is pretty similar to what I'm shooting on here, actually. So yeah, The Creator is a hell of an accomplishment, and I might still buy it on Blu-ray just to revisit some of the gorgeous visuals, but unfortunately, it didn't come close to living up to my expectations. Of course, these are just my opinions on seeing the movie one time. If The Creator sounds interesting to you, I would definitely recommend checking it out when it comes out in theaters on September 29th. I saw it in IMAX, and yeah, it's definitely worth the upgrade from the standard showing. So if you have IMAX near you, definitely check that out. If you've seen The Creator already, definitely let me know what you think in the comments below. And if not, what's your favorite sci-fi movie right now? For me, I'm gonna go with the classic 2001 Space Odyssey, but let me know yours in the comments. And of course, if you want to keep up to speed on all the new big movies that are coming out in theaters and at home, make sure you subscribe. All right, my dude, I'll catch you in the next one. Be good.